What was something you wrongly guess as very expensive? Cheap when you were a child. Always had sparkling grape juice as kids, but only for New Year's. Seemed like such a lavish bottle. They're cheap as hell, but only having it, that often made it feel so special. It never occurred to me that some food was more expensive than other food. I 100% thought my mom made spaghetti all the time because it was her favorite. I was much older when I realized it was because it would feed a lot of people very cheap. Rugs. Why are rugs so fucking expensive? Food in the cupboard. Fridge. When you're young, a lot of the time it's just there. When you get older, especially when you move out, you realize how much money your parents spent to keep you fed. I always thought Viennetta ice cream was so posh and expensive. Food coloring and fondant icing for baking. Thought it was so expensive and that's why only fancy cakes use them. Turns out they cost like £1 each. I remember wanting to have the cheapest beverage at a theme park with my aunt and uncle when I was 11. I insisted on having water, while they were subtly nudging me towards milk. Milk was cheaper. Who knew? The dentist. Didn't think I'd be in debt from getting teeth fixed. The cost of building a fort that connected my backyard to my friend's backyard still hasn't happened. Video games were crazy expensive, but that's the only thing I cared about. So when I looked at X item I would compare it to video game prices. 40, 60 US dollars. In other words, I would look at something and think that costs like half a video game. With that amount I could get 3 video games, that's like a quarter of a video game. I kept doing this until I reached 17. Disneyland. Honestly, I didn't really have a guess on how much a ticket was, but we got to go every couple of years, so I figured it was no big deal. Houses. Used to think they were like £500. I have kind of a funny story that is related. I got an allowance, even when I was really young, but it was only a few dollars a week. When I was probably 6 or 7 we were at the mall, and I saw a sign for golden retriever puppies for $299. Naturally I assumed this was $2.99. I went into the store and proudly put $3 on the counter, only to be told I would need a lot more than that. As an adult I also look back, and I can't imagine what my parents would have done if I had somehow had enough to purchase a dog, despite the fact that we already had to at the time. Going out to anything other than fast food was an expensive night out. Even Applebee's. Edit. I think there's some confusion in my wording. What I meant was, I thought Applebee's was like a Michelin star experience, because we went out so rarely that I just thought it was the top of the ladder. McDonald's was our family night out restaurant at best, unless it was a birthday or something like that. Then we went to Applebee's, or if it was a really big deal, Olive Garden. Disney movies. I grew up poor and my dad would always get the forgettable off-brand versions of popular cartoon movies, instead of The Hunchback of Notre Dame. For example, I'd get to see The Secret of the Hunchback. Lots and lots of that. When I saw a kid who owned a real Disney movie on VHS I assumed they were very rich. I didn't realize you could buy several in 1 month and not have to declare bankruptcy even without being rich. Thought my grandparents' chandelier was made out of diamonds. Later when I grew up I told my grandfather that, and he took apart the chandelier and mailed it to me 3,000 miles away. 45 years later it hangs over my bed. I'm rich. Legos. Those things are expensive. When writing compositions in primary school, I'd give my characters a $5K fine for jaywalking. Not me, but my son, when he was about 4 or 5. On seeing a man getting out of a Porsche convertible, asked in a big loud voice, "Dad, has that man's car got no roof, because he is poor and can't afford one?" The guy's face was a picture. Made even better when I just replied, "That's right, son." Curtains. Never thought of them being valuable. Guess what? If you have someone make them fit your place they cost a fortune. Those self-stick bows you put on gifts. I used to think they were super expensive because everyone in my family used them over and over. We had a few that we used so much they were recognizable. We had a few fancy ones. Wrapping paper too. Based on how careful my family was about not tearing it and how my grandmother would fold it, I figured it must be really expensive. Yeah. Both are super cheap. College. My oldest brother and all his friends went to college, never mentioning the expense. As a kid, I thought it must be cheap because all the guys are doing it. When I was a child, I thought an average car costs like $100k. Going out to eat, I think I thought it cost like $10, $20 or something. I never understood why we didn't go to more restaurants when I was a kid. Thought my mom was just cheap. Turns out feeding a family of 5 at mediocre restaurant can easily cost over $100 on 0 if people get drinks, appetizers, and dessert. Vanilla extract. I figured since everyone bakes it would be cheap. Boy, is it not cheap. Always thought clothing was cheap. Wasn't until I was in college that I realized I always had new clothing because my mom never bought anything for herself for like 15 years. Figured credit cards meant infinite money. Turns out they do for a little bit if you're real stupid, which I was. Cars for sure. When I was young, I figured just about everyone made something like $75k year salary, so all that money could be spent on a car and would only take 1 year to pay for a real nice car. Concrete statues. Our neighbors had 2 lions at the end of their driveway in a very modest neighborhood, and I thought they must be the richest people in the world. Cell phones. I remember looking at phone covers in a store magazine. They were $20. I then realized I had $20 and got so excited to buy a new phone. I got disappointed when I realized they were just covers. Phones were so customizable and diverse back then. Well, when I was very young, I used to think things' value cost was determined by how many $1 bills could fit into it. As in, to buy a car, stuff it with ones, and then that's how much you owe the seller. Gas. During the early 70s, all the adults were saying that it was high. Then they would say that it's coming down. Then back up. Then it's cheap. I never could figure out a median price. My mom used to buy a lot of fancy looking drinking glasses, and I always tried my best to treat them with care. I broke one of them one time and started to freak out, thinking that my mom would be pissed. She came in and saw the broken glass, and I started profusely apologizing. She laughed and told me that she wasn't mad over a cheap $1 glass from Dollar Tree. I was shook. Didn't understand volume. Thought in-app purchases for $1 would never cost anything despite how many times it was bought. I'm glad my parents had a password